got fantasy football and a sprinkling of draft because he covers the draft for NBC Sports. But you can check him out on the Fantasy Football Happy Hour on NBC Sports. And you know that, man. And that is Connor Rogers. Follow him at Connor J. Rogers. We are presented by San Xavier University and broadcasting virtually from the NBC Podcast Studios. Connor, how are you doing, my guy?
I'm great, guys. Thanks for having me. How are you?
We're doing good. We're doing good. But you know what? This year is better than last year when you joined us. We have weapons, Connor. It's crazy. You know, you look around the roster and there may actually be some guys in the NFC North that play for the beloved that you may pick when it comes to fantasy. So let's start right there. Connor, how should I prioritize Bears players? Now, I'll say this. I'm not one of those people that has to pick up their hometown, somebody from their hometown team. And it gets annoying to me because I'm like, you don't want to win, do you? Like when you are forcing it, it's like, eh. But again, enough about me. How should I go about if I'm picking Bears players, prioritizing which players should go first to last?
The Bears, how more fantasy relevant can you get in 1 year, right? It's really crazy. Like you said, it's not just that they got a little renovation here. It feels like a full makeover when you just look at this offense. And the fact that it starts all the way with the guy calling plays and Shane Waldron that I have confidence in as well. That's going to I think make this offense look much different than what we're accustomed to seeing. But that's because of the guy under center and Caleb Williams. And because of his arrival, and I think they'll be careful with him. They're not going to have Caleb drop back 45 times a game. And, you know, what he had to do at USC, where he had to go be Superman every day and score 40 points, or USC wasn't going to win a game because of their defense. I think the Bears want to avoid that route. But it's still, to me, makes a guy like DJ Moore just so valuable, right? I mean, the fact that you have a quarterback that I think can really challenge the third level of the field, but we know what makes you feel so good about DJ Moore is the floor because of the scheme touches underneath. He's somebody that it's almost overlooked in this league, maybe because of the offense he's been in, that if you have the right coach in play and you really don't need to be that creative, he's someone that can make things happen with the ball in his hands off of screens and those, get him in motion and dump him the ball. But the fact that he could challenge at the deeper areas of the field, DJ Moore has to be the guy for me all the way. And then it gets kind of tricky, right? Because you love the shine and the excitement of drafting Rome Odunze in the top 10, but Keenan Allen is still Keenan Allen. I mean, let's not disrespect Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen is that guy. And the fact that you go out and spend some money on a DeAndre Swift, where I already like the look of this backfield, right? Like I'm a believer in Roschon Johnson as a short yardage guy, a guy that can pass protect. Khalil Herbert, we know he's had the injury problems, but he's had big playability. But the next guy to me would be Keenan Allen, because it's just all about health with Keenan Allen. If he's suiting up, he has to be next in that order of targets on this team. This team has a really good defense, so maybe they won't be in that script of playing behind and having to throw too much. But Keenan Allen's still going to be a really effective player. What I'm interested in, guys, is where it comes down to, we know Rome Odunze is just one more or Keenan Allen injury away from having a massive role. But when you look at Waldron last year, Seattle had a lot of success with 2 and 3 tight end sets and running and throwing balanced out of those sets. So look at this offense, and I think, hey, just because they got, the guys, the horses for 11 personnel where they could play with 3 wide receivers on the field, don't sleep on the impact of Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett. I think they're going to be very involved in this offense. Obviously, Mercedes Lewis in a blocking role. But I think when you're looking at tight end in fantasy football, so many of us just go the streaming route. Like, we're not going to spend a top, first, second, third round pick on one of the top 3 tight ends, Laporta, Kelsey, Mark Andrews. You're looking for guys that, hey, do I like the matchup? Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett are going to be viable, in my opinion.
I want to touch more on the tight ends later, but we gotta talk about Caleb Williams. He's the talk of the town this summer. Now, obviously, there are varying philosophies on when you should draft a quarterback, and then it was always kind of a gamble drafting rookie quarterbacks in fantasy until the likes of like C.J. Stroud or even what Anthony Richardson was doing early in the year last year. So I'm just curious, your personal standpoint, when do you think is it right to draft Caleb Williams? At what round are you saying if Caleb Williams is still there, I'm grabbing him?
Well, it's funny you ask. I'm doing a super flex draft right now for Scott Fishbowl, which does such a good job raising a ton of money for charity. And with Superflex, obviously the priority for quarterback is insane. So I just watched Caleb Williams go in the second round, a 2-quarterback league. That's where he's going to go. The quarterbacks are going to fly. Now you look in a standard league with 1 quarterback. Caleb Williams is going to be your kind of dart guy. You're going to go out into the draft and you're going to get a surefire starter, whether it's you want to spend big on a Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, even CJ Stroud and Joe Burrow are going to go really early. Or what I like to do here, guys, is I like to take a dart guy like Caleb Williams where the ceiling is so high. Now, once again, maybe they'll be a little careful with him as a rookie, but we know if you need him to really, drop back and take over the game, we've seen him do it. I like to take one of the mid-tier options with that dart guy. So do you go get Brock Purdy later on and then a couple rounds later take a Caleb Williams because you might be in a keeper league? You might think the ceiling for Caleb Williams is really high. Yeah, it's going to be in the double-digit rounds, right? I think in a standard league where you have 12 teams, everybody's going to take one of the top quarterbacks somewhat early. Caleb Williams is probably going to be looking more in the 11th, 12th, 13th round, depending what you could be on for his ceiling. But I love taking those flyers on quarterbacks because everything I just said is how people felt about Jordan Love last year. And he finished as QB5. So, and I understand Jordan Love wasn't a rookie, but it was his first year as a full-time starter. So there's always a quarterback that is not taken as a top 10, top 12 quarterback and finishes in the top 5 to 7 quarterbacks. 2 years ago, it was Geno Smith. Last year, it was Jordan Love. And I'm kind of surprised. I understand people are obsessed with rushing in fantasy, but I am not taking Jaden Daniels over Caleb Williams right now. I just think at the end of the day, you have to be a proven quarterback through the air. And Jaden Daniels made a lot of nice strides, and he will start for Washington. But the upside as a passer for Caleb Williams is in a different stratosphere for me. He would be the first rookie quarterback I would be taking, although that has not been the case, I think, in a lot of standard drafts.
I got a Waldron question, but we got to do this Caleb right now. All right, so just after, let's just say the quarterbacks that you named is going high, what tier would you place drafting Caleb at?
It's one of those things where you got to walk through it, right? You go through your typical tier where if you're going to spend really big, I'm talking like second or third round, you have Josh Allen in that category. Lamar Jackson is usually in that category as well. People will always take Mahomes really high, although he hasn't been asked to necessarily be a fantasy star in Kansas City's offense. He's still obviously the greatest quarterback in the world. And then you kind of get into the tier where there's Stroud and Burrow. You're still spending at a pretty high priority. We can call that kind of tier 2. Then you do get into the really weird tier range, right? Where you have Tua, maybe Jared Goff, maybe Brock Purdy. You kind of get these guys that people kind of, turn their nose up in the air to, but they are very viable fantasy quarterbacks throughout plenty of the season, especially Goff in his offense under Ben Johnson, Tua in his offense under Mike McDaniel, Purdy under Kyle Shanahan. They throw for touchdowns. And then to me, it would be the next tier. So I guess we can call it tier 4 in that range where it's really a lot of rookie quarterbacks. It's a lot of guys that we think the floor is okay. Baker Mayfield, right? A guy, maybe he'll throw for 24 touchdowns and I can live with that. Maybe a Geno Smith who will throw for 20 plus touchdowns. I can live with that. Where Caleb Williams, he's in the tier with those guys, but the range of outcomes is totally different. I mean, Caleb Williams could throw for 30 touchdowns as a rookie. Caleb Williams can also throw for 14 or 15 touchdowns as a rookie. They decide to scale it back and be a run-heavy team and kind of protect him in the red zone, especially when you look at the way the personnel is built on this team. So that's how I would look at it. But like I said, rather than just double dipping on a Geno and a Goff, I would take the guy with the really high ceiling and Caleb Williams and pair him with somebody that I think gives me a viable floor like a Brock Purdy in that situation.
That's great. Kind of along those lines of, differing fantasy philosophies. Where do you view the defense? Because obviously the Bears offense is grabbing all the headlines, but it's the Bears defense that really made this team go at the second half of last season. And it's the Bears defense that might be counted upon to carry the team in the early stages of the season while the offense kind of gets going with the rookie quarterback and with the new offensive coordinator. So are you a guy who likes to grab a top 5 defense, a plug and play defense that you're going to ride with every week? Or are you streaming a different defense every week, depending on the matchups?
I've gone a lot of different ways with this over the years because for a long time, I like to grab a top 5 defense because I hate the waiver wire battle on defense. It's like it's annoying, it's time consuming and tedious where you'd rather allocate that time towards getting a player for your flex. Maybe you're in a bad quarterback spot with all the quarterback injuries in today's NFL and you're battling it out for that. If you obviously are in a league with a budget, with a fab budget, how much money do you want to be allocating to a defense every single week? Not much. Now, the problem is, guys, this goes back to a point I just made. So many quarterback injuries now across the league where streaming defenses pays off in a big way. Yeah, we might sit there and kind of, laugh at a defense like, say, the Minnesota Vikings, who are right in the middle of the pack, right? But what if they're playing a third string quarterback on a given week? They might be a top 3 defense in fantasy. So I think the way it's gone, I've actually gravitated towards taking a more fringy defense, maybe a defense that's in the top 8 to 12-ish range. And then if I have to get creative and start to stream in really, really pivotal weeks, like playoffs or bust kind of weeks, then I go down that road. And when you look at the Bears, I'm sure they're right in that middle of the pack for fantasy defenses, much different than real defenses, because you obviously want to see takeaway upside when it comes to defenses. So listen, when you look at checking the boxes, pass rush up front, Montez Sweat made a gigantic difference on this defense last year, and to be able to cover on the back end and bringing Jalen Johnson back on that contract, which I thought was a really, really good deal for the Bears side of things, having a number 1 shutdown corner like that. That's the big difference. We know they're coached up really well. They have speed in the middle of the field. And the fact is, playing in the NFC, even in their division, you feel pretty confident about that. I'm not saying their defense is going to walk over, the Lions and Green Bay, but you feel good about them maybe over the Vikings. The NFC is not the strongest conference, I think, in this era right now in terms of the quarterback play. So, yeah, I think it's one of those situations where you could save a little bit by taking the Bears defense because you don't have to take them too early. And then if you don't like the way things are going, you can go the streaming route.
Wait, okay. You keep putting something ahead of my question in my brain. When do you, Connor, get upset when you see people going for defenses? At what round are you like, oh, here they go?
Anything before the second to last round. Okay. It drives me nuts. I have finally, in my longtime league, my league I've been in with my friends from college when we were freshmen, I have finally convinced them about 2 years ago to vote out kickers. And I had to spam the group chat for about 3 years to get rid of kickers. And I finally won the good fight. They will not cave on defenses. We will have defenses till the end of time. I think this is year 13 or 14 of this league, and we still have defenses. We'll have it for another 14 years. I'll never get my way with that.
It's funny you say that. I have also tried to lead the charge against kickers and saying ban kickers from fantasy football. I love kickers in real football.
Yeah.
They are important to real football. In fantasy purposes, I want nothing to do with it. However, my friends are leaning towards more adding a second kicker.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
More randomness.
Two kicker league.
A super leg league. You've heard of super flex leagues. How about a super leg league with 2 kickers?
That is absolutely outrageous. That makes you actually have to care about the kicking position in fantasy football.
That's kind of where they're at.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Under Center Podcast, fortunate enough to have Connor Rogers here to talk NFL and, of course, NFL fantasy football. Connor, I want to get to something you mentioned earlier, and it's something we talked about a lot here, and that's putting a cap on expectations from Rome Odunze. And it's not because of the player that he is, but it's perhaps because of the scheme that the Bears may be in. And you mentioned Shane Waldron and his preference in Seattle being in 12 and 13 and having 2 tight ends out there. What do you think will be the similarities with the style of play that Waldron had when he was offensive coordinator in Seattle? And is he more of a disciple of Sean McVay in the fashion of it goes off of what I have, what I'm going to necessarily put out there? I'm not as rigid, and it has to be about me. It's more about the players that I have.
Definitely a yes to the latter. And that's why I'm still a believer in rookie season Rome Odunze, not just entirely writing him off, right? Use a top 10 pick on him. And just because, you look at Seattle last year, 63.8% of the time they were in 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers on the field. That's not a really high rate in football. You'll see, some guys from the same tree, like Kevin O'Connell with Minnesota, even hover around 88% at certain seasons. Sean McVay is a guy that, throughout his high usages of 11 personnel in a season can go up to 89, 90%. Now, what I will say is you have to factor in 2 things. Like you said, I think Waldron is very flexible with his personnel and wants his best players on the field. The second thing is everything I'd always heard over the years over there is Pete Carroll still always sinks his teeth in offensive influence, which means running the football, playing heavy. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, in fantasy, we do care about that a lot, right? So I think when you look at Waldron, just because he had success playing with 2 or more tight ends on the field, which he did over 30% of the time for Seattle last year, it doesn't mean that he has to go into his back pocket and live that way with his new team. Now, is it something that allows the Bears to be a week-by-week team? Like, hey, this week we want to play a lot of 2 and 3 tight end sets because we might want to give a heavier look. We might want to run the ball against this defense that might be a little bit more vulnerable. We have 3 running backs that could do that. But if the Bears need to go into a week where it's, hey, we're up against whoever it may be. Look at the Packers who are going to be able to score points this year, or the Lions who are going to be able to score points this year. Like, we're going to need 30 this week. Why would you not want your top 10 pick out there on the field in 11 personnel, especially where you can move guys around? And this might even be a bigger, note about DJ Moore, right? Where if you have Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen out there, I like them on the outside on the perimeter. DJ Moore in the slot, that's a terror for a defense. Giving him a two-way go, allowing you to use him in motion. I just think that it opens things up. So I think with Waldron, you don't want to live and die too much with the trends we have of him in Seattle, as much as there's things to pull out that he's been successful with and things that he wants to work on. But I also think it just kind of shows the balance he was able to learn going from the McVay tree, then getting the keys to the car a little bit in Seattle, although Pete Carroll was probably still in his ear. And now with Chicago, being able to play multiple ways.
I want to drill down on the two tight end sets a little bit more as it pertains to Cole Kmet, because for a while it was looking like he was trending towards being a top 6, maybe even top 5 tight end in the league, both fantasy and real life football. But now the Bears have added all of these weapons. They've added Gerald Everett, who is a fine, pass catching tight end in his own right. So does that give you any hesitation as it pertains to Cole Kmet's fantasy upside this year?
Upside's the right way to put it, right? Because there's just touchdown equity, right? There's only so many touchdowns that can go around, even in a good offense. That's the reality we live in right now. You think of it when you look at Miami, right? Because we all love Miami's offense in fantasy. It's the question of, well, how high can I draft Jalen Waddle, even though I love Jalen Waddle, with Tyreek Hill there eating an insane amount of targets? How high can I take, Devon Achane, when the fact that Raheem Mostert's still really, really good and they drafted Jalen Wright? Like, touchdown equity and just touches in general is really important. Now, I do think the pendulum swung too far the other way with Kmet. With all that being said, it went one way where it was, well, now they're a Ferrari offense. They got 3 number 1 wide receivers. They got a quarterback that could throw it 50 times a game. And, then they could turn around and hand the ball to DeAndre Swift. And who cares about Cole Kmet? That seems just a little bit too far the other way, right? Like, you look at rankings, Kmet is a guy that isn't even being drafted as a starting tight end in fantasy. Typically, he's not taken necessarily as a top 12 tight end in fantasy. And some guys you see go ahead of him, Pat Freiermuth, for example. Like, do we just like Pat Freiermuth over Cole Kmet because you look at the Steelers offense and you don't really like a lot of things about it? I don't know if that's a viable draft strategy when I've seen Cole Kmet be a really, really high upside tight end throughout stretches of a season, and they paid him like one as well. And then you look at, even a guy like Dallas Goedert, who seems to get hurt a lot, and the Eagles, you go back to touches and equity. Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown eat up a lot of that, rightfully so. So if Cole Kmet's being drafted as tight end 15 or 16, that feels a little bit late to me. Now, that means he's probably a value. If I can get my starting tight end and then swing back around, a couple of rounds later and take Cole Kmet as insurance, that's really ideal insurance to me. I think he's going to be a part of this offense. And I think, honestly, he could be a sneaky part of this red zone offense as well because of the size he brings and the fact that if you put Kmet and Mercedes Lewis on the field together, who's going and running the routes? It's Cole Kmet.
You've mentioned Jordan Love and Jared Goff. What other players in the NFC North would you prioritize picking up early in fantasy?
Well, the really tough one right now, and I just took him in this league. I think everybody has cold feet with Justin Jefferson, which seems like an insane sentence to say, like it's Justin Jefferson. But to be fair, a Sam Darnold, J.J. McCarthy quarterback competition doesn't really inspire confidence. Now you wonder, can they do enough to carry a number 1 wide receiver in fantasy like Justin Jefferson? Because he's too talented. He's with a smart play caller in Kevin O'Connell. I think the answer is yes. I wouldn't sour on Justin Jefferson in any kind of way on his ADP because of that. I think Aaron Jones is a value, right? Aaron Jones is all about health. When Aaron Jones plays, he can win you weeks in fantasy. He goes to a scheme that knows how to run the ball in outside zone with Kevin O'Connell. They've seen what he could do against them all those years in Green Bay. I like Aaron Jones a lot. I really do. And then you go back to the tight end conversation. It almost feels like TJ Hawkinson is just a forgotten man, right? Because it's, he got hurt at the end of last year. He's not going to be guaranteed to be ready for the season. But during the stretch run, it feels like Hawkinson's a guy that if you took him as tight end 17 on board, like that's somebody that can end up winning you your league. And then everybody kind of wants their hand in the pie of the Lions offense. Goff's been a really viable starter. You just look at what Amon-Ra gets from a target standpoint. I'm really fascinated to see, is this the year that they force Jameson Williams into the offense? Like, we used all these assets to get him. Is that going to take away from Amon-Ra and Laporta? I don't think so, because Jameson is such a home run hitter. He doesn't need 8 targets to impact a game. But I am curious the trickle effect on that with the offense, an offense that also has 2 running backs that are significantly involved as well, in David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Speaking of running backs, what DeAndre Swift do you think we're going to get this year in terms of a fantasy player? Because obviously there was the highly touted Lions running back that never really came together as he was splitting carries. And then last year, he finally has a 1,000-yard season as more of a bell cow back for the Eagles. New system, new team, new everything. Which version of DeAndre Swift do you think we're getting this year?
It's a great question, because he's one of the more frustrating players to figure out across the NFL landscape in fantasy. Like you said, 1,000 yards last year, relatively efficient as a runner. He gave you 5 rushing touchdowns. And at the end of the day, he had his least productive receiving season that we've seen for him as a pro, right? He went from, 357 yards to 452 to right under 400. Then last year, he barely scrapes to 200. And that matters a lot from the running. A lot of people are playing PPR. A lot of people are playing half-point PPR. I think with the Bears, we'll see more balance. Do I think he runs for 1,000 yards this year? No, I wouldn't want him to. I want to see the ball go to Khalil Herbert. I want to see the ball go to Rashawn Johnson. Do I think he tops more than 214 receiving yards? Yeah, he should. This is an offense that, to get their rookie quarterback comfortable, trust the outlet. And the receiving production, when you look at the 3 running backs in this offense, should go to DeAndre Swift. So as successful as his Eagles tenure was in 1 year as a rusher, it feels like it got away from what I think is the best component of his game, and that's as a pass catcher. And I think that's why the Bears paid him. They know they can tap into 400 receiving yards from DeAndre Swift and 50 catches, something that, he got to the 46 mark as a rookie, 62 as his second year. There's a 50-catch player in there more often than not, I think, down the road. And I think that's why the Bears paid him. And I think that's what makes him a valuable, is he going to be your RB1 or RB2? No, but if you put DeAndre Swift in your flex, I think he's trustworthy.
Look, first 5 rounds, who do you, as far as position, prioritize?
Right. So standard league, we'll say 1 quarterback. I just find myself always going wide receiver, at least the first, usually the first and the 3rd round. Sometimes I wait on running back as a whole. It's just, you look at the landscape, right? Are you picking high enough to get Christian McCaffrey and Breece Hall? You're probably not. And if you are, that's a big decision to make, because they are game-changing players in terms of the touches and production, but they play running back. They get banged up. Bijan Robinson is in that category based on ADP, but we need to see Bijan have that kind of season, and I think he will. To be honest with you, and I love all 3 of those guys, where they're being drafted and valued at, I stayed away from the running back position in the first round. I just sit there and go, okay, one of CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and I think he's kind of in the tier, but maybe not for some people, Amon-Ra St. Brown. One of those 5 is going to be there for me in the first round more often than not. I'm just going to take one, and I'm going to feel good about it. I'm getting a wide receiver 1 that's giving me wide receiver 1 production every single week. I don't have to worry about a lot of down weeks from those guys, because they are really the engines of their offense. When you look at it, all 5 of those guys, they just dominate the workload in the offense. So that's typically how I go about round 1. And then I do take a true BPA approach. I'm not taking a quarterback honestly, not often in the first 5 rounds anymore. It goes back to what I told you guys earlier. I like the strategy of ending up with a Purdy, Goff, and an upside guy. I'll take 2 in the later rounds. I have no problem using multiple picks on quarterback, but a round 4 or 5 asset, or Josh Allen in round 2, yeah, it seems great and they get you points, but I feel like I need to capitalize on the skill guys in those rounds. I want to walk away with one of the 5 receivers I said, and then can I end up with, Garrett Wilson or Puka Nacua, or do I look at the next tier of running backs and say, okay, I'll take Jahmyr Gibbs or Jonathan Taylor. I think they're going to be highly productive and their offense is under good offensive minds. Derrick Henry, the touchdown equity is going to be there in Baltimore. I have no problem taking him in the 2nd or 3rd round, and everybody's doing that right now. So that's how I go about drafting. There's no perfect science depending on your league scoring, your rules, your draft league mates who might just take their favorite players. But typically this year, as I go through mock drafts and best balls, I find myself typically going wide receiver. I'll dabble with 1 running back pretty early and then look for value later. And then I'll just go back to the pass catching role and just fill out my roster that way early on.
Connor, this has been awesome. This is the last question from me. And I'll open up to the whole league, not just the Bears. Is there a player you think is being undervalued or a favorite sleeper you have as we approach training camp?
Ooh, sleeper's always tough. I feel like we live in this fantasy world where like it's, everybody's carrying the flag for someone. I'll say underappreciated. He's kind of been the topic of the day because he looks like he put on 30 pounds of muscle, although he's always been jacked going back to Georgia. Zamir White on the Raiders. Zamir White is right now looked at as not a top 20 running back based on where he's going. I don't have an explanation for that. The Raiders have showed you their hand multiple times. They had no interest in adding a true threat to him in the offseason. They didn't add a quarterback. So do we think Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell are dropping back 40 to 50 times a game? It's Antonio Pierce. What does Antonio Pierce believe in? Playing defense and running the football. Zamir White was a really, really big-time recruit and a good player at Georgia and had a significant knee injury. And he's been able to bounce back from that into a viable pro. And when Zamir White had to play for Josh Jacobs, he was a great running back in fantasy. So why do we look at him and go, I'm not going to take him in the top 20. I'm going to take the likes of, and I love David Montgomery, but David Montgomery is now losing touches to Jahmyr Gibbs. James Conner, who's hurt every year. Aaron Jones, who I said I liked a lot, but he's hurt every year. Najee Harris, who seems to let you down in fantasy every single season. Why Ramondre Stevenson is hurt all the time? Why are these guys valued over Zamir White? I don't. Maybe I'm, buying in too much, but I think Zamir White is going to finish the season as a fringe top 15 running back in fantasy.
I'll add one more point to your argument. Luke Getsy, new offensive coordinator. What did he do with the Bears? Built one of the best rushing attacks in the NFL. So, right. You know what? I'm writing Zamir White's name down. He's going to be a guy I'm circling in my
I take him
drafts.
In every best ball draft I've done in the spring and summer. I've taken him. And I don't do a lot of these talking points about him because I don't want his ADP to go up, quite honestly. Well, selfish.
I'm sorry. sorry for blowing the spot.
I'll still gladly tweet out the show, but I just don't but I'm nervous now.
Look, okay, there's always a great value if you hit on a rookie and you don't overdraft him. What rookies are you looking to perhaps draft in the upcoming drafts that you haven't used already?
I'm actually surprised by this, but I do find myself drafting Malik Nabers more than I thought I would, right? A guy that went in the top 10 of the draft, and now he has the red, the caution tape around him because nobody likes Daniel Jones. The Giants' offense has had their own problems. They lost Saquon Barkley, so maybe you look at it and go, man, his Nabers going to draw a lot of attention. But, Nabers really isn't look at the way Marvin Harrison Jr. is valued. He's going as a top 15 wide receiver. Nabers is barely going as a top 30 receiver. The combos before the draft was Nabers is almost as good as Marvin Harrison Jr. Some teams thought he was better. I look at Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll knows how to scheme for a number one wide receiver. I'm not saying Daniel Jones is going to have this great bounce back season, but can he get the ball to Malik Nabers? I think he can get the ball to Malik Nabers. So that's the rookie I find myself looking at and going, I like his offensive rookie of the year odds every time I open up the books. I think he's been at plus 1,800. That's always surprised me. I think Malik Nabers is going to have 1,000-yard season and kind of walk himself into 6 to 8 touchdowns. And I find myself walking away with he's in the tier of Stephon Diggs, who, okay, Diggs is over him, but Houston has a million different weapons, and Diggs didn't look like himself last year. Zay Flowers, Jaden Reed, Christian Kirk, that kind of tier. Malik Nabers is going to be a superstar in this league. I really think he's the next DJ Moore. I really do. He's going to be a superstar. So if I can get him at, the end of that run of wide receivers that I named, I'm taking him every single time.
My last one for you, and this is about you and your leagues. Is there added pressure being that you're an expert? And if you do win, do you get the same amount of enjoyment because it's like, oh, you're supposed to do it? But the flip side, everyone is coming for you because they want to say they beat that guy who this is what he does. How does that feel?
It's a great question. And it goes a couple different ways, right? We have our league at NBC that we talk about on Fantasy Football Happy Hour all the time. So that's more, I better not stink in this league or else Matthew Berry is going to remind me of it every single show, or my other co-host, Jay Croucher, is going to sit there and remind me of every single show. And it's everybody that works on the show. So there's a lot of pride there. That's the one where I don't know if you get that much from winning it, but you lose a lot when you lose in it. It's embarrassing. My home league that I told you about earlier, those are all my friends from college. That is the ultimate no win. If I do well in that league, it's because I work in football every single day. If I do poorly in that league, I'm a fraud. So there's no benefit from it besides the fact that I could take their money when I do win the league. So that one's the funniest one to go through. And then the 2 dynasty leagues I'm in with people that are in a very similar career path as me. They work on the draft, they work in fantasy as well. So the playing field is wide open, and that's probably the most fun from a competition standpoint, because you go into a rookie draft and you have no edge at all. All these guys have done all their work on it. There's no sleepers, there's no steals. I find that to be the most enjoyable. Especially Dynasty is just an incredible format because it's a really fun way to play. People listening haven't tried that. Definitely try a Dynasty format. So yeah, that's how it goes for me. I love fantasy football and I get a ton of enjoyment at it, but I've definitely, as you could tell, cut down. Like I'm in 2 redraft leagues, the one I've been in almost my whole adult life, and then the one at NBC, and then 2 Dynasty leagues. That's it.
Fantasy Football Happy Hour. I'm sure you can find it wherever you get your Peacock at. And NBC Sports. Connor, it's always our pleasure talking to you. I will at you if I have any questions throughout the season. So it's still on deck. Have a great day, and we always appreciate you, man.
Thanks so much, guys. Always great talking to you as well. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. Make sure you tune in every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. here on NBC Sports.
Congrats, you finished the video. If you want to build on that success, download the NBC Sports Chicago app. It's got highlights, exclusive insights, and push alerts tailored to you. Everything you need to be a real Chicago sports fan. Download it now.